Today we're going to look at the first 15 verses of John chapter 6 and see that by asking ourselves some questions as we look at these verses, we can apply many spiritual truths and discover deep things in these verses. I've entitled this, A Huge Need and Just a Little Old Me. And we're going to talk about that and how it applies to you and me today when we come right back. Hi, and welcome to Bible Study with Friends, where our goal is to help you get more impact from your Bible study. How to study it, how to mark your Bible, how to apply it to your life. We're going to talk about that a lot today. I'm here with my friend Sherry Mangrum, and Sherry and I are continuing our study in the Gospel of John. Too often we read it fast, but you and I, Sherry, have been talking about John for our 15th Bible study, and we're up to chapter 6. Okay. I hope you've been getting something deep and worthwhile in your life from these studies. Today we're going to do 15 verses, Sherry. We're going to talk about a specific instance that is recorded in all four Gospels. So John is using it as a sermon point to teach us something, and we're going to see that today and what's all in that miracle and how does it relate to us today. Okay?
Yes.
It's going to be good. All right, let's get right into it. We're in chapter 6. We're going to go from verse 1 to verse 15. This is an interesting chapter in that there is a gap of time between chapter 5 and chapter 6. Now, we don't know exactly how long it is, and John doesn't care when he's writing this because he's getting on to the next sermon point in his sermon called the Gospel of John. But most scholars think that it's been 2 or 3 months since healing the man in the pool. So now, a couple months later, where is he? Read verse 1.
He is on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, Tiberias.
Okay. Now, he's not in the city of Tiberias. He's on the other side of the Sea of Tiberias. That was another name, a local name, for the Sea of Galilee. So when he says on the other side, what do you think he means? When he goes up to Galilee, he has gone up a couple times. And when he goes up, he is ministering over in Cana and Capernaum and the cities on the west side of the Sea of Galilee. He's getting fairly well known over there. This time he comes up and he goes to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, to the east side. And it's a wilderness there. Let me show you on a map, just to give you a little feeling. There's Galilee. This is the Sea of Galilee. Now, he's been over in Capernaum, is right up here in the north. Cana is over in here. So we see he's been mostly on the west side. But this time he comes up to the sea and he goes to the other side, to this plain of Bethsaida. This area right over in here is it's a kind of a wilderness. In fact, there's a little sign there, feeding the multitudes. You can see that right there. That he's over in this plain of Bethsaida. Now, we see that he goes to a new area of ministry, but he's well known in the entire area of Galilee. So what happens? Let's go back to the scriptures. Read verse 2.
A large crowd followed him because they saw the signs he was performing on those who were sick.
Now, Sherry, if you and I are having an event, a ministry event or any kind of event, and we look out and see a large crowd come assembling, what's your reaction? How do you feel?
Must be doing something right.
Okay, you'd be excited. The disciples would have looked out and said, wow, we are getting a huge crowd coming to hear Jesus speak, right? So there's this huge crowd assembling, and watch what happens next. And we're going to ask ourselves some interesting questions. Now, Read verse 3.
Then Jesus went up on the mountain and sat down with his disciples.
Okay, now read verse 4.
Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was near.
Okay, now this is an interesting little detail. This is the second Passover recorded in the book of John. In chapter 2, it was Passover time, and now it's Passover time again. This is the second year of Christ's ministry. Even though we're fairly early in the book of John, we're not early in the ministry of Jesus. He had been up in Galilee, Cana. He went down to Jerusalem, cleared the temple. He met with Nicodemus. He went back up to Galilee. He came back down to Jerusalem. So he's been moving back and forth for a year. And now all of a sudden he's back up in Galilee, that 130-mile trip, and he is on the other side of the Sea of Galilee in this wilderness, and he sits down with his men and looks down the mountain, and he sees a large crowd. John makes it very clear. In fact, he repeats that phrase twice. Let's look at this. He says it's Passover time, and look at verse 5.
Therefore, Jesus, lifting up his eyes and seeing that a large crowd was coming to him, said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these may eat?"
All right, now I want to discuss this for a minute, because we read that and we go, okay, the crowd was hungry, and Jesus says, Philip, how are we going to feed all these people? Let's think more about what he's actually saying to Philip. Now, first of all, why Philip? Why does he talk to Philip and not Peter or one of the other?
He's from the area.
He's from Bethsaida. Bethsaida is probably the nearest town. All right. So he'd ask, hey, this is your neighborhood, Philip. Where are we going to get enough bread to feed everybody? And Philip looks down at this crowd. And how big is the crowd? We're going to find out in a couple of verses.
It says it's large.
And a little bit later, we're going to find out there are 5,000 men. Now we say, okay, this is the feeding of the 5,000. No, it's not. There are 5,000 men, but it's a crowd from all over Galilee. So there would be women and children there too. So all of a sudden, there are 5,000 men, and let's just say, just for the sake of math, 2,500 women. And let's say in those days, there were a lot big families, but let's say there were 4,000 children, 2,500 women, 4,000 children. That's not a stretch.
That's 11,500 people.
Okay. Now, the crowd's getting hungry. Let's say you're going to feed the crowd, and you look out and you say realistically, 1.5 pounds of food each, okay, average, okay? And you got that many people. Now, I want to show you what I did here, because I wanted to think deeply about what kind of miracle this was. If I'm going to feed 11,500 people with 1.5 pounds, that's 17,250 pounds of food. Now, if I said, go into your city and go to McDonald's and buy quarter pounders to make that much food, it would be 69,000 quarter pounders.
Definitely call ahead.
Yeah. And basically, this is what he's asking Philip, because he's saying, hey, Philip, where are we going to feed all these people? And Philip is looking and he says, hey, if we drained every bakery in Bethsaida, that wouldn't be enough bread, right? And he's looking and saying, man, and he's trying to do the math, and he's going, what you're asking is impossible. It would be like saying to you, Sherry, go into Chattanooga and go to every single McDonald's and buy 69,000 quarter pounders.
You couldn't do it.
You could drain every McDonald's and you couldn't get that many, right? So yeah. Jesus is asking Philip for the impossible. So I put in my notes, who, me?
And in the impossible is where Jesus works best.
Now we're going to see that. Look at verse 6 and into 7.
This he was saying to test him, for he himself knew what he was intending to do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, for everyone to receive a little.
Okay, how much are they going to get? A little. 200 denarii is 8 months' wages,
Wow.
3/4 of a year. That wouldn't even be enough to really feed them. Each one would get a little morsel. If I'm Philip, I look at this huge crowd and go, what are you asking me? This is incredible. We don't have this kind of money. And even if we could, there's not enough bakeries in Bethsaida or the region to feed all these people. So there's a huge need that Jesus is perceiving and laying on them, right?
Yeah.
And Philip says, there's only just enough to give them the little. Now, I want you to read 8 and 9.
One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are these for so many people?
Okay, there again, he's asking, let me show you this. This is what that looks like. 2
Wow.
fish and 5 loaves. Andrew finds this kid and basically he says, hey, kid, come with me. Now, the kid probably thought that this was food for the master. So he comes along and he says, sure, you can have my lunch. But this was what was going to feed a kid, right?
Yeah.
And Andrew says, this is what we found, 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are these for so many people? We ask ourselves the question all the time when the Lord gives us a mission. When I started Bible study with friends on YouTube, I went, wow, I'm overwhelmed. There are millions of people watching YouTube. And how am I going to say anything that they're interested in? You're starting a ministry with women, Sherry, and you go, wow, I can be so overcome by the huge need that I just don't know what to do. Even if I empty all my resources, it's still not enough to meet this huge need.
Yes.
That's where the apostles were. This is realistic. This is the apostles looking at this huge crowd going, man, there is no way we can feed these.
They're still thinking physical.
Still thinking physical. Okay. So in verse 10, Jesus, have the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place. So the men sat down in numbers of about 5,000. This reminds me of Psalm 23.
Yes.
What does the shepherd do with the sheep?
He makes them
Lie down in green pastures. Okay. Jesus takes the loaves and having given thanks, he distributes them to those who were seated. We see from Matthew, Mark, and Luke that he blesses them, gives them to the disciples, and the disciples go out into the crowd, right? So we have the disciples out with their basket that Jesus has blessed and miraculously divided into 12s, and they're out feeding the multitudes who are sitting around on the grass. So all of a sudden, they start to distribute this food, and they distribute thousands and thousands of pounds of food. What a fantastic miracle. But let's think more deeply about that, saying Jesus feeds people, okay? Look at what the scriptures say now. Look at verse 12.
When they were filled, he said to his disciples, gather up the leftover fragments so that nothing will be lost.
When Andrew said, this is not enough to feed anybody, and Philip said, even if we had that much money, it would only give everybody just a little bit. And here Jesus feeds them until they are full. And he says, not only are they full, but gather leftovers so that nothing will be lost. Verse 13, so they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. Now, what's the significance of 12 baskets?
Disciples.
So in the leftovers from the ministry to the crowd, there was enough to bless or fill the guys who were doing the blessing, right?
Yes.
If Jesus has given us an overwhelming ministry, we just can't do it. And that's really the test to Philip when he said, hey, feed these people. Philip should have turned to him and said, we can't, what can you do, Lord? We have this huge need and it's just little old me. How am I going to do that? And God says, I can not only make the provision for the ministry crowd, but I can also at the same time provide for you. So when we minister, God blesses us, fruit of the ministry, spiritual and physical. That's why we don't hesitate to ask people that are blessed by our ministry on Bible Study with Friends. We ask them to make donations, tax deductible donations, because if we're feeding you, it's only right that you could support the ministry so that we could feed others. So let's go back. This is not the first time that God has fed a whole bunch of people. I want you to turn over to 2 Kings chapter 4, 42 to 44.
Now a man came from all Shalisha and brought the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley and fresh ears of grain in his sack. And he said, give them to the people that they may eat. His attendant said, will I set this before 100 men? But he said, give them to the people that they may eat. Thus says the Lord, they shall eat and have some left over. So he set it before them, and they ate and had some left over, according to the word of the Lord.
Now, this is Elisha, and Elisha is performing this miracle of feeding these men with a very little, and there's leftovers. This solidifies Elisha as a man of God. It's a miracle to validate his ministry. But it also is interesting because Elisha starts with more resources, 20 loaves, and he feeds less people. Jesus starts with less and feeds way more people, and there are still leftovers. Now, when Jesus calls Philip and he goes, I want you to see what I'm doing. And they go, wow, this is great. Earlier in John, he says, you're going to see greater things than these, just that I know what's going on with you. And this is one of these greater miracles of Jesus showing his provision in a greater way. Yes. So we ask ourselves the question, what has God asked me to do to feed the crowd? I think back to the Samaritan woman. Remember the crowd of people that came down? And Jesus said to the disciples, the harvest is plentiful. And they go, wow, there's so many. I don't know what I'm going to do. Jesus says, hey, remember, I can take care of that. You come to me. And I'll not only take care of it, but I'll minister to you at the same time. See how encouraging this miracle is?
Jesus wastes nothing.
That's right. And giving us a huge ministry and a huge calling is nothing but a test to see if we rely on God's provision instead of relying on our own abilities. Jesus can provide. That's the lesson of the feeding of the 5,000. The connection of what Jesus does here with Elisha, it's a validation of Elisha, and it's a validation of Jesus and his ministry, that I'll do greater things than these. And he feeds greater things with less resources. Let's just read verse 14 and 15.
Therefore, when the people saw the sign which he had performed, they said, this is truly the prophet who is to come into the world. So Jesus, perceiving that they were intending to come and take him by force to make him king, withdrew again to the mountain by himself.
Okay. Now, this goes all the way back to Malachi, when Malachi said that the Messiah was not going to come until the prophet came. And they were looking for this prophet. All of a sudden, he does a miracle greater than Elisha. And they go, wow, this is the prophet we've been waiting for. And if we make him king, he will be the Messiah that leads us into political freedom from Rome. And if we looked at a politician, you remember a politician promises a chicken in every pot, right? So if a politician came on the scene that said, Hey, I can provide everything that you people need, and all you have to do is just let me provide it for you.
Vote for me.
They would vote for him.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a danger in that we look again, the crowd is looking on the physical and not on the spiritual, just
Right.
like the disciples, just like we so often do.
Yes.
We look at the ministry God has called us to and we go, wow, physically, this is impossible. I started this ministry of Bible study with friends when I was in my 70s. And I've talked to guys in their 60s who say, man, I just don't have any energy. I can't do anything. I just don't have any energy left over. I can't serve the Lord. No, He can use you to provide way beyond your capacity and bless you at the same time.
Yes, I'm tired, but what can you do with what I do have left, Lord?
Andrew at least came and said, hey, we can't feed all these people, but I got 5 loaves and 2 fish. Jesus said, that's good enough. You bring me what you have, and I'll bless it, multiply it. And you and I doing this little Bible study in John, people all over the world are watching this. I know that. 50% of the people watching this video are watching from outside of the United States.
Amazing.
And you go, how did that happen? God works these things out. And all we need to do, we perceive the need. It's a huge need. We come to the Lord and we say, Lord, there's a huge need and it's just little old me, but I'm willing to do what you tell me to do. And if it's taking a basket of fish and bread and starting to distribute that to the people around me, let that be a blessing.
The Lord multiplies.
And that's the lesson that we see at the beginning of John chapter 6. Jesus can provide way beyond our capacity and way beyond even our imagination of what he can do. All we need to do is to be, Lord, I want to be your hands and feet. I'll distribute the bread and the fish. You got to do the blessing.
Yeah.
And there'll be leftovers for all of us. Spiritual leftovers is good.
Yeah.
I'd rather have spiritual leftovers than a little extra turkey. We've talked about how important it is to bring to God what we have and how God can multiply that in provision and meet the needs of many. I want to recommend a video to you. It's called, What is Your Ministry Calling? It's out of the book of Colossians. It's a great study. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you're blessed. We'll see you next week as we continue our study in John chapter 6. Until then, God bless you.